Well, the doctor is in as researchers narrow down 4 chemicals circulating in the blood that may signal that your death is approaching. It sparks the very real possibility that a blood test that could predict death might be developed. But that's not all. Joining us now, Dr. Ernest Patti, Senior Attending Physician of Emergency Medicine at St. Barnabas Hospital. So what we're talking about here is trying to find signs in the bloodstream that suggest that you're headed for an early end, not necessarily trying to predict exactly when you're going to die.
Right, and they weren't, the goal wasn't to predict a specific day that you're going to die.
Right.
They were looking for common factors in people that they could use as a predictor to say maybe your end is closer than we actually think.
A little bit like a cholesterol test or something like that. Your doctor says, hey, your cholesterol is a little high, you should change your diet.
Sure. And what they found was that they did a study. It was actually 2 studies that were done. One was done where they looked at roughly 9,400 people.
Pretty big study.
It's pretty big, yeah. And they looked at those folks, and they looked for common biomarkers. Biomarkers are different types of metabolites, proteins, lipids that are in your blood. They looked for, well, they were looking for ones that were common in people who died. And they found 4 that they narrowed down.
Because they went back 5 years later, studied the same population, found how many of them had died, and then looked at what their blood had appeared like 5 years earlier.
Exactly. And they found these 4 markers that they said were more common in the folks who had a demise after 5 years than those who were still living. And what they figured out was if you were in the top 20% of having those 4 biomarkers at an abnormally high level, if you were in that top 20%, you were 19 times more likely to die within that 5-year period than you were if you had them in, say, a more normal level.
All right, so let me read these 4 markers. They mean virtually nothing to me, but maybe you as a doctor could explain what they are. Alpha-1 acid glycoprotein, albumin,
right.
Very low density lipoprotein. That's the one I've heard of.
Right, you've heard that.
Oh, the particle size thereof, well, I should say, and citrate.
And citrate.
What is it about those 4 compounds or biomarkers that tells you something?
Well, the interesting thing is all 4 of them aren't associated with like the same disease states. You know, what they figure is those 4 may be associated with an index that they're using like as a fragility index. So if you have those 4 at an unusually abnormal rate, they assume your body's in a more fragile state and you have an increased incidence of dying within a 5-year period.
So it's not screening for any one individual method of your demise, but whether it's cancer or heart disease or anything like that, these 4 biomarkers sort of rose up in the bloodstreams of those people who were about to expire.
An excellent way to put it, yes. They weren't associated with any one particular type of disease or death. What they were associated with, though, was an increased chance of you dying in the 5-year period. So they're looking at them as hopefully, if we can study them more, maybe then they can narrow it down and figure out we could try to improve your chances of survival if you were running around with these 4 biomarkers.
So again, this isn't about telling people, okay, you have exactly 73 days to live.
Imagine the ethical and moral consequences of that,
And
right?
most people don't want to know, do they?
Well, most people don't, you're right, but I'm assuming there are a lot who go to psychics and fortune tellers and they want to know what's happening in the future. Leads to a lot of interesting questions.
I just get my palm read when it's time for that. Dr. Ernest Patti, good to have you.
Always thanks for having me, John.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Jenna.